and welcome to a slightly late final wrap-up of 2021. It's fine, it's fine, it's fine. Today I'm going to be doing my December 2021 wrap-up. Now I do not have any of the books with me. I left them at my parents' house when I went there over Christmas. So yeah, let's jump straight in. Let's see what I read in December. First of all, I read Mysterious Ways by Abby Evans. This was an arc and it is a queer, fantasy, joyous adventure. I had such a great time reading this book. It follows the main character, Isabel, who works in law enforcement as a guard in this fantasy world. It's a very matriarchal world. It's a very sapphic world. Like, basically everyone was a lesbian character. And she has a bit of a will they won't they with a local criminal, and they end up going on an adventure to find the goddess and talk to their goddess. This was so much fun. I really liked the way that the author integrated the deities into the fantasy world. It was so great to read a super queer fantasy. It was joyous. It was joyous. Next, I read Homegoing by Ya Gyasi, and this story follows two branches of the same family tree, starting off in 18th century Ghana and following one family in Ghana and the other in America. It was so moving and insightful and beautifully written, so well crafted. The ending was just perfectly bittersweet, and I mean, it was amazing. There's a reason this book is so highly praised. It was truly incredible. The book is structured in almost like short stories that follow each character, each member of the family, so they each get their own short story, and then the next one, it sort of alternates, but then the next one will be about their descendant. And I thought that was such a good way of seeing people through their own eyes, through their parents' eyes and through their children's eyes. Just gave us this complete view of the person, but also was very, it makes you think about how you see the people in your family and how each generation is often fighting the same fight, and the progress that is made, but also how slow that progress can be. Then I had another arc, and that was The Quid Pro Quo by A.L. Lester. This was so much fun. I had such a great time. And I very rarely read mystery books, but this was a cozy mystery with historical setting and queer main characters, all things that I love. In a cozy town, a body has been found and an elusive detective has been brought in to solve the case. But he starts to have some feelings towards a friend of one of the suspects, one of the key suspects. And it complicates things. There was like a paranormal fantasy element to this, which I thought that was kind of the weakest aspect of the story. It was still fun though, but the real hero of this book was that all the characters felt so real and grounded, and also just having such a diverse set of characters as well. So one of the main characters is trans, there's an MM relationship in the central couple, there's a sapphic relationship as a sort of side couple. So it was really nice to kind of have historical fiction that is about happy queer people. That is hard to find. I enjoyed this so much, I went and read another A.L. Lester arc, and that was Surfacing Again, which is a short story set at Christmas on Lindisfarne, which is one of my favourite places, and it was a cute little sapphic romance. It was really lovely, with like Celtic vibes but contemporary setting, and it was just really nice. I also liked having slightly older main characters. I feel like it's rare It's rare and it's nice to find. Then I read The River Between by Ngugi wa Thiong'o, and this was very different from what I expected. I don't really know what I did expect, but this was very different from that. It follows two communities in Kenya, one of which follows the traditional religion and traditions that they have always followed, and the other of which is quite sort of radically Christian, and the conflict between the two. While it did touch on and sort of discuss the people who suffer and in one case die because of this conflict, then it's the main character is a young man who tries to bridge the gap between the two, and everyone is extremely resistant towards that. It almost felt a little bit unfinished. The story just kind of stops at the end. And it was the sort of book where I got to the end and I thought, I need someone who understands literature better than I do to explain this book to me, and why the themes are what they are and how they've been presented in the way that they have, if that makes any sense at all. That being said, it was still very interesting and very, very well written, if just completely different from what I've read before. Next, I listened to the audiobook. I got this on NetGalley for Vanishing Monuments by John Elizabeth Dempsey. This follows a photographer and a university professor who travels back to their hometown to close up their mother's house, visit their ill mother, and really tie up the loose ends of their childhood and youth. I could tell this book was beautifully written, and all I wanted to do was pore over every single page and go back and read bits again and kind of spot links and whiz through some bits and slow down on others and really take my own time and pace on it. And I think being an audiobook just sort of took away from that a little bit. It's a sort of book where an audiobook would be a really good reread, but not necessarily for the first read through. I felt like I missed a lot of the imagery and a lot of the strength of different passages. That being said, I still did enjoy this book. It was a really heartfelt meditation on gender and our childhood and nostalgia and memories and the idea of monuments and how we remember things as a society as well as individuals. This book also sometimes used second person, which I don't know if I've ever actually read before. Again, that's something I think would have worked better in a read book, because then I could visually see, oh, we switched now, rather than be driving and be like, hang on, how long have we been in second person? But I did still really enjoy it. It was a beautifully written book. So I'm going to keep an eye out to see if I can get a physical copy anywhere to just actually read it with my eyes instead of my ears. I'm usually a huge fan of audiobooks, but I think this one just didn't quite work for me. Then I read The House in the Cerulean Sea by TJ Klune. It's a booktube favourite. It's a booktube favourite, and for good reason. At the start, I was reading it and I was like, I don't get what the fuss is about. I don't know why everyone is obsessed with this book. Then halfway through, I was crying and I was invested, and I was like, we're here. I'm fully here for this book. This book follows Linus Baker, who works for the department who care for magical youth, and he is sent to inspect an orphanage, which is the house on the Cerulean Sea, where the children who are deemed the most dangerous, all live there. Of course, he gets there and finds out they're not dangerous at all. They're just the most different children, and that the owner of the orphanage, the guy who runs it, Arthur, is so sort of kind and loving and such a great parental figure to these children, and they help him have a new outlook on life and more confidence in himself and more conviction in his beliefs. It was so lovely, just gorgeous, just such a lovely book, filled my heart with so much joy. And the character development of Linus I thought was done so well, that it was one of those things where at the end you realise how much he has changed, but it didn't feel like that along the way, you know? It just was. It just was. I think we need more books for adults that are written in the vein of whimsical children's moral tales. I loved it. I loved it. I loved it. It was so creative and it was funny and I loved it. It was so good. Then a reread for me was the audiobook of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. I had such a great time with this one. I think this is, I don't know if it's an underrated Jane Austen book because, you know, all of her books are like highly thought of. It's just lovely. Most of it is typical Jane Austen. There's a weird like kind of invented murder plot halfway through, but you know, just ignore that bit. The rest of it is like classic Jane Austen. The main character is Catherine Morland, who is a young woman. She's only, I think, like 17 at the start of the book. So this is her first stepping out into adulthood, and she goes to Bath with her with family friends to sort of enjoy her first time out in society, and she meets the very handsome Mr. Tilney and the very friendly, if not quite as nice as she thinks, Isabella. And she gets caught up in the drama of friends and romance, and it was just lovely. It was lovely. Also, side note, so John Thorpe, who is like briefly, he has a crush on Catherine. He spends the whole thing, he's always like, my carriage can go at this speed, my horse goes at this speed, and it was such a vibe of like guy who just bought a motorbike, you know? Some things never change. Some things never change. Then I read Midnight in Everwood by M.A. Cusnier. This is a Christmas fantasy based on the Nutcracker. Honestly, it was fine. It was fine. I did think it was very inventive. I really liked the way that the Nutcracker story was adapted into the book. It just didn't really hold my attention very much. I wasn't really that invested. But, you know, it was a fun story, a fun fantasy, and yeah, that's that one. Then I finally read the Odyssey. I've been saying I'd do it all year, and I finished it on like Boxing Day or something. I finally read it. Honestly, I didn't enjoy it as much as the Iliad. I mean, Odysseus is kind of the worst. It was a lot more like political manoeuvring and people talking about things. I enjoyed the like adventure-y chapters where Odysseus is recounting his adventures with like Circe and Cyclops and all those things. I'm glad I've read it. I've read it. I did enjoy it. I have read it. I now feel slightly more justified in my love of Greek myth retellings now that I've read both the Iliad and the Odyssey. Like, I know it's the bare minimum, but I have read them. Then another audiobook reread. It was Hogfather by Terry Pratchett. And I listened to the new audiobook with Sian Clifford, and it was glorious. So good. So good. When I first read this, when I was 13, 14, and I don't think I've really reread it since then. I've watched the film a lot, but I haven't reread it. I was like, it's not my favourite. What was I thinking? This book is so good. It's so good. Just so good. So good. This is part of the Discworld series, and in this particular book, then the auditors, they are auditors of reality, and they hate humanity and its messiness and randomness and chaotic everything, that it doesn't follow the rules of the universe. And they want to get rid of the Hogfather, who in Discworld is their version of Father Christmas. It's a simple enough premise, right? But you've also got big statements about belief and about humanity, what makes us human, what makes us a society, what makes us people, how do we look out for the most vulnerable people in our society, why should we look out for the most vulnerable people in our society, what makes a good or a bad person, why do we need to believe in things as children, why do we need to believe in things as adults. It's just so good. There's so much going on in terms of like philosophical statements, but there's also so much going on in terms of just a fantastic plot, brilliantly thought through plot, which every Terry Pratchett plot is, you know? The plot was just immaculate, can't fault it. It was funny and witty, the characters amazing. I love Susan. I'm always going to, you know? That's not a surprise to anyone. I mean, how did I ever not absolutely love this book? Baffles me. I wrote 2 of my favourite quotes down in my reading journal. They're both brilliant quotes, but also just like the range. So you have this beautiful quote about how belief is what makes humanity, and this is the quote, where the falling angel meets the rising ape. What a beautiful line. What a beautiful line. Then you also have Susan going, "Hi, inner child, I'm the inner babysitter," which is like amazing. But I mean, talk about range. That's in the same book. Talk about range. The next book I read was another arc, and that is Out Front to the Following Sea by Leah Angstman. This is a historical fiction set in 17th century America? 17th century America. And follows one woman as she tries to survive, basically, in a very, very hostile society. There's war in Europe, and that war has kind of spread to America, with English settlers and French settlers, as well as Indigenous Americans, all fighting each other. And she just wants to survive without being accused of heresy too much. It was beautifully written. It took a couple of chapters to get going, but once it got going, I just couldn't put it down. The world was so immersive. You can really tell the author has done her research, but without it ever coming across as like, hey, here's all these things I know about this time period. And I liked that it was set during this war, but it was never about the war. That's just happening in the background. If you enjoy historical fiction about sort of women's stories and women's history, I mean, it was just incredible. I loved this book. It was absolutely amazing. And then the final book I read in December, my final book of 2021, was Elixir, which is a collection of short stories from Hanson House, which is a small independent publishers. This collection showcases the Hanson House authors, and all of the stories in this collection are queer, sci-fi or fantasy. It was a really nice variety of things. You had some like classic sci-fi space adventures, you had some sort of historical fantasy, some more like high fantasy sort of things. It was just a really nice mix. I think there's really something for everyone in this collection. What I really liked as well is the different ways the authors had incorporated LGBTQ plus aspects into the sci-fi or fantasy stories. Like some of them were just, hey, it's sci-fi with a sapphic romance, or oh, it's fantasy, but the main character just happens to be queer. Some, you could tell that the whole story from the very sort of ground up was rooted in queerness, and I really liked that variety that kind of just showcased a lot of different ways that you can write this sort of story. And that's it. Those are all the books that I read in December. I hope you enjoyed this video. Give it a like if you did, and pop in the comments what you read in December, and if you've read any of these books, what did you think of them? I will see you all next time. Goodbye!